Yeah, and I'll send a text to my other guest that we're going to start late on him. We'll make this happen. And guess what? We are switching to Studio 8 in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Well, good evening, and welcome to pjnet.tv. For those of you that have been waiting, I really appreciate your perseverance. We have had some problems here, but that's not unusual, so we'll go from there. We actually are going to have a great time tonight because we have a special guest, unlike any guest we have ever had before here on pjnet.tv, and I'm glad to introduce to you on the Eagle's Nest stage. That is Kurt Kolka, and Kurt, I'm glad you do comics because humor, the light side right now is a good thing.
Yes, it is.
While I'm texting our next guest, tell me the story how you got involved, or tell us the story how you got involved. Because some people may think you're a grown up that never grew up and maybe still has that kid comic book stuff in you, but that's really not the case, is it?
It is a little bit. uh,
You grew up about the same time I did. I remember
yeah.
Peanuts. I remember Andy Caff. I remember a bunch of comics, but boy, that seems like a long time ago. Comics have made a big impact over the years, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. My dad, when I was just a little kid, he used to put me on his knee after church every Sunday, and he would read me the Sunday comics out of the newspaper. So that's how I kind of developed an interest in comics from the get go. And he used to read me Peanuts. Um, I used to request that he read me Pogo, although I'm sure I did not understand it as young as I was. Alley Oop, uh, Blondie, Beetle Bailey, all the well known ones. Um, were the ones that I started reading, and in fact, it was the comics that taught me to read, much to the delight of my reading teachers, I'm sure, because I was not all that interested in Dick, Jane, and Sally, which we had when we were growing up. But anyways, yeah, that's how I got started with the reading, and it helped develop my interest in doing that. And from newspaper comics, then I moved on to comic books when I was a little bit older, and got in some of the early days of Stan Lee's superheroes, the Incredible Hulk, Ant Man, and so forth. And that's what sparked my interest in creating comics.
It's actually a serious business, though, isn't it? I mean, it's not just fun and games. It's a business. It's an enterprise. It's actually
Oh
hard
yeah,
work, right? I Tell me it is.
yeah, it is. Yeah. When you're doing comics, there's a lot of things that you really need to concentrate on. For instance, as a writer, I'm always thinking, what should happen next? And not only that, from that point of view, but also I have to think of as an artist, what's going to be the best way of showing this as a storyteller? Because not only are you writing, but you want to get the right angle to have that dramatic effect if you need it, and so on. So you start out, and you get basic idea of what you're going to have happening in the panels you have before you, and you usually do a little sketch, a mini sketch, to figure out what things are going to look like, and you get a basic idea about what the characters are going to say and so forth to carry your message. And then after that, when you think you got it pretty well figured out, then that's when you get out your actual drawing paper and your pencil, and you start drawing everything in. And once everything is sketched in pencil, You come back, you decide exactly what the character is going to be going to say. And once that is done, that's when you start inking it all. We put the indie ink or some type of drawing pen, depending on what you prefer to use, over the top of the penciled lines. And eventually, you've got a comic strip.
And the color art,
Yeah. Color is mostly today added by computer.
Okay.
So I have to end up scanning in my artwork and then coloring it in using a coloring program.
So you literally, the original art is drawn on paper. This is not something you're doing with software.
I'm still doing it the old-fashioned way, but I know there are people out there that are doing it digitally.
Yes, I have a digital tablet, and it's got a stylus, and it's got 240 brushes.
Wow.
Anyway, we'll talk about some of the cultural stuff later, but I love the mechanics. There's the image, then you have the comic strip. Now, how many frames were in the typical comic strip that I used to read on Sunday?
Sunday, generally, I think it was set up for 9. You have 3 tiers of 3 panels, although the top tier was mostly for the name of the strip. So you'd have your name across it. And there are some newspapers that wanted the strips smaller, so the top tier of panels was kind of the throwaway tier if you wanted to fit more comics on the page. And then you kept your story then in those 2 bottom tiers, allowing for newspapers to put across the top the name of your feature and your author's name and so forth.
So you've been doing this all of your life. Now, is this a hobby? Do you have a day job, or is this what you do? You're independently wealthy, and you just...
Yeah, I wish. I wish. Right now, I am just a freelance writer, and the Cardinal comic strip is among the things that I am doing during my daytime hours. So yeah, it's more of a hobby at this point. I am hoping to use it more in ministry. I have used it in ministry in the past, but I'm hoping eventually to do more with this part of the ministry. My ministry is basically a writing ministry, is what it is, an art ministry also when it comes to the comic aspect of it. So these things are kind of all intertwined together when it comes to doing this. And also, I am also working on a novel at this point, too, that'll be part of that, too.
Okay. And we'll get to that in a minute. Now, if I recall from our previous conversation today, your first real paying customers were, in fact, churches?
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. See, what we did... at the beginning was I came up with an idea for doing a sort of free newspaper that was basically just one big comic section telling a single story with a Christian message to it. Now, I live up in northern Michigan, and up in this area, it's all rural towns. And so what happens is, because of that, we used to have all these tourist publications that were free sitting on shelves in gas stations, businesses, and so forth. Well, the one thing that I noticed being in the newspaper business was there was nothing for kids. These are all geared toward adults. And meanwhile, the kids are sitting there in the back seat, and they're going, "We have nothing to do." So I thought, wouldn't it be cool to create this kind of free comic? And I talked to different pastors, and they backed me on the idea, and so they funded the project, and we came out with a publication called Cardinal Adventures, featuring a character I had created. And so it got out there. The amazing thing is, not only did we hit the local market, the local readers, But because of the huge tourism industry up here, we started hitting people from other states with the gospel message through this. That's what it really was amazing. Every once in a while, we'd receive a letter from someone in some other state saying that they had read the publication and really enjoyed it, and they're going to share it with their friends and so forth.
Must have been very sad. Now, how old were you at the time?
Let's see. When we first started that, I would have been 31.
Okay, so that kind of kick-started your career. And I have to ask this. I know this is a detour, but I see a Jim Croce likeness on the wall behind you. You must be
Yes.
from up north. I mean, I like the man, but I wouldn't have pictures on my wall of him.
He was one of the icons of the age.
Okay. Now, you have created somewhere along the line, and tell me where, this incredible character of the Cardinal.
Yes. Yeah. The story behind that originally was that I attended Concordia University in Ann Arbor, and their athletic teams were called the Cardinals. And since I was really big on doing newspaper work, so I joined their student newspaper. And because of my love of comics, I asked if I could be their cartoonist. And so the publisher, who was a teacher there, and the editor, who was a fellow student, they said, "Yeah, we'll give you a shot. We have nobody else that can do that." And so, as a fan of the superhero genre, I started thinking about what would I create for that, and I came up with the idea of this character who was a Christian superhero called the Cardinal, who lived on the campus there and had all these daring adventures, which were, how shall we say, semi-humorous. Didn't take itself too seriously, but that's where it all got started. Was there in a student newspaper, and it took off amazingly among the students there. So that's where that got started. And then it was, I think, 8 years after I left college that an opportunity came up. I was working at a newspaper office, and I was attending this really little church, and this pastor had a weekly column in the paper. And I wasn't there very long when the pastor had received a call from another church and decided to leave. Well, this weekly column needed to be filled. And so the people in the church, knowing that I had a degree in English, they came to me and said, "Would you consider doing something with that space that we're paying for to go into this publication every week?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got an idea for that." And so I basically retooled the Cardinal for that publication. And that's how we first got started doing the Cardinal for a larger audience. And we were hitting, I believe, around 20,000 readers every week just through that. And then from there, we expanded it to its own publication. But the Cardinal is, I think, unique in the fact that I tried not to make him too powerful. I gave him one special superpower, which was flight, so he could get to the scene of a crisis of some point. And so at that point, because he was a Christian, I wanted to show the readers that once he landed, he had to put his trust in God as to how to deal with that situation. So these became stories about, okay, a Christian arrives in this situation, what should he do? And so the readers then could also say, well, the Cardinal does this, and his only power is flying. So I could do that too, actually. I could step in and help someone, in some way, fashion, or another.
So the Cardinal, which started out as a college kind of funny gig, is starting to take on some moral undertone. And,
Oh, absolutely.
And then Now, I've got this graphic here that I want to talk about for a moment.
Hmm.
Bullying is no laughing matter.
Yes, yes. To tell you the truth, I think it was back in 2012 or 13, somewhere in there, when we were getting all these stories over the news media about bullying. That's when the idea started coming to me. I had been bullied when I was attending public school for about 10 years. And what God began to show me as an adult was that these these bullying things had become like little recordings in my head. So if I failed at something, I'd always hear, "You're such a loser."
Hmm.
Or if I was afraid to try something, I would hear the voice of the bully again in my head saying, "You're a sissy," and I didn't know why God was bringing me all this stuff back into my head again. Uh, until finally I began to realize that, I went through that for some reason.
Hmm.
It wasn't a pleasant time in my life, but I went through it and God brought me through it. And I realized that, and I finally thought, well, maybe I should do some kind of a story on bullying. And so I did this story in the Cardinals comic strip where I have these characters being bullied. And the unique thing is that the Cardinal learns lots of people have been bullied, and we just don't realize that. And so that gets this whole conversation going about bullying. Part of that story is also that this victim of bullying goes and he is turned into a powerful creature by this mad scientist, and he goes after his bully.
Hmm.
And so the cardinal then has to step in and he has to save the bully from the victim. So we have this sort of moral part of the story there, and the cardinal has to step in at the end and say, well, we can't allow this to happen. And it's a story about learning to forgive the bullies that are in our lives. So that's where that began. And I have a friend who is in the publishing business. He has a very small publishing company. And I was talking to him one day on the phone, and he said, I read that Cardinal story of yours about bullying, and I really liked it. He said, I would love to print that in a book or a comic book. And I said, well, yeah, we could probably work that out. So I went back and I started putting the strips together into pages. And it was coming along, and as I looked at it, I thought, there's some really nice pages here, but there needs to be more. And so I thought, what am I going to do with this? I mean, here we are with this comic book that doesn't quite have enough pages. And I started remembering what I had been reading in the newspaper from the comic strips there. And there were a number of comic strips that were also dealing with bullying, that subject. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to add some other cartoonists' work to this? So I asked my editor, I said, would you mind if I tried contacting some of these professional cartoonists out there? And he said, no, it sounds like an interesting idea. So I went to the syndicate websites, the cartoon syndicates, and found email addresses for a bunch of the famous cartoonists. And I thought, I'm just going to shoot this email out to them and ask them if they'd be willing to participate in this. And to my astonishment, over 30 cartoonists said yes to the project. And that included some of the big names. I mean, Mort Walker from Beetle Bailey. And it included, for better or for worse, Lynn Johnson agreed to help me with it. And it was amazing. And what I found out was, as I was asking for these pieces of artwork, is that most of those people had been bullied themselves as kids. And they said, we're going to send you our stories. Not only will we send you a comic strip, but we're going to send you our stories about how we dealt with bullying. And it became a huge project that we weren't expecting to be quite so big. But I like what it stood for. We had a whole, like I said, over 30 cartoonists that joined in this, and they everybody just did their best for it. It was a wonderful project to work on.
Kurt, in wrapping things up, you're not just a comic strip guy. You've got some serious stuff out there. Afraid We Are Not.
Yes, that's a book that I'm finishing up right now. It is a book about a boy who is bullied. It takes place during the mid 1970s, and it is a time period when we have feminism rising up, and then to counteract that, we have the traditional male dominant movement trying to say, no, our way for men is the right way. And this character in this book, his name is Jan Richards. He's 15 years old. He doesn't have a father, and he doesn't have any father figures in his life, nor does he have any brothers. There's just, there is his mom and his sister. So what happens is he tries to figure out, well, what does it mean to be a man? And it takes him on this journey, and it finally begins to fall in place when he begins to talk to the pastor of his church. They begin working on a project together. And through this pastor and this pastor's knowledge of Scripture, Jan begins to learn about, what does the Bible say a man should be like? What are the qualities that God appreciates in a man? And that's kind of the idea behind the book, is looking at manhood from a biblical perspective, and also looking at the aspect of bullying as well.
You have friends in the chat room posting links to where your stuff is. Well, Kurt, I tell you what, I'm sorry that we had so much trouble getting started, but it was worth the wait. And you have taken a relic of the past almost, the Sunday comic strips, and turned them into a vibrant ministry. And I just thank God that you're doing that. And I hope that your work reaches, the world, because we need, and it is an interesting way to capture an audience. I will testify that the Army was having trouble, or the military was having trouble, getting soldiers to take care of their weapons. And they had the training manuals and all that. When they published the training manual in a comic, with these, of course, voluptuously beautiful women, all of a sudden the soldiers were taking care of their weapons, and we're save lives. It's amazing. But Kurt, what an amazing ministry. Thank you for sharing this with us, and we've enjoyed listening to your story, and we just wish you the very best. Godspeed, my brother.
Thank you, and God be with you also.
Thank you, sir. Kurt Kolka right here. Sorry we took so long to get that started. Del Didway is on his way. I've got to tip my hat as I slowly back out of here. 2 questions for you on my way out. Number 1, what is the boldest thing you have ever done for Jesus Christ? Number 2, how long ago was that? The challenge, my brothers and sisters in Christ, I believe, is to never be satisfied with either answer.